Hello, everyone. This is going to be 17.4, The War's End and the Effects of that End of the War. And we're going to start with a rather longer quote from Maya Lin, who created the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. And she said, "I thought about what death is, what a loss is, a sharp pain that lessens with time but can never quite heal over, a scar. The idea occurred to me there on the site: take a knife and cut open the earth, and with time the grass would heal it, as if you cut open the rock and polished it. I also wanted remembering the past relevant to the present. Some people wanted me to put the names in alphabetical order. I wanted them in chronological order so that a veteran could find his time within the panel. It's like a thread of life." So if you ever go to the Vietnam War Memorial, it is just a long wall near the Lincoln Memorial with a lot of names, the names of anyone who died in Vietnam. And names are still being added to this as well. Now, let's look at attempts to withdraw from Vietnam. Nixon had run for president saying, "I'm getting out of Vietnam," and he tried, but we were pretty deep in, and it was hard to step away once we had gotten that far in. We saw that peace talks between North and South had stalled due to neither side really wanting to compromise. But as the talks are going on, Nixon was trying to create a plan for what he called Vietnamization, which means let the Vietnamese take over the fight, and we are going to slowly back out of this war. Let the South Vietnamese take over. Now, let's look at the anti-war movement intensifying in the United States. Partially, the anti-war movement intensified because it looked like we were going to expand the war. We were going to go into areas around Vietnam, including Cambodia, and bomb them too. So it looked like the Vietnam War was going to get bigger. And so this really worried a lot of the protesters, including some of the protesters at Kent State, where 4 protesting students were killed by National Guardsmen during a protest. And so we see protests, we also see counter-protests, people who opposed the war, people who supported the war. They were getting bigger and louder and just more polarized as time goes on. So here is the Kent State Massacre of this time. That's what it was called. 4 students shot and killed. This photograph won the Pulitzer Prize in 1970. Now, tensions only continued to increase after stories of American atrocities got out during this time. For instance, in 1968, the story of My Lai got out. My Lai was a village where a number of unarmed civilians had been killed by American soldiers. And the number of U.S. troops who were talking about it said that they were only following orders. In 1971, we also saw that a guy named Daniel Ellsberg, stole a bunch of secret documents from the Pentagon called the Pentagon Papers. He gave them to the New York Times, showing that the government had not been giving the full truth to the American people about what was going on in Vietnam. The U.S. government tried to ban the release of the Pentagon Papers, but the New York Times and the Washington Post both won lawsuits that allowed them to release these papers. So here are some of the civilians at the village of My Lai. And here's Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers, saying there should be at least one leak like the Pentagon Papers every year. Richard Nixon very strongly disagreed with that sentiment. Now, let's look at the end of the war. Nixon wanted to get America out of the war before the 1972 elections. And so in October of 72, about a month before the election, the U.S. and North Vietnam came to an agreement. This helped Nixon to win a huge re-election in 1972, along with a bunch of other stuff that we're going to look at before Watergate. In 1975, the North Vietnamese went back over the line and attacked South Vietnam, and this time there was no America to protect them, and so Vietnam became one unified communist country in 1975. And so here are the last people trying to get out of Vietnam on a helicopter out of Saigon in 1975. This is the fall of Vietnam right here. Now, the effects of the Vietnam War. We lost over 58,000 soldiers in Vietnam. The Vietnamese lost over 2 million, that is both North and South. Communism did spread to a few other Southeast Asian countries, for instance, Laos and Cambodia. However, it did not continue expanding as we worried it would with the domino effect. Many Vietnam veterans returned home and found that they were not returning home to the hero's welcome of, of World War II. They were hated and scorned. Many of them were seen as killers and were sort of shouted at it on the streets and stuff like that. Many black Vietnam veterans were still being discriminated against and still had race-related violence. One big problem was PTSD, post-traumatic stress. A lot of Vietnam veterans suffered from PTSD. Now, Congress also changed how the president goes to war, because Vietnam started with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, where basically they said the president has the right to do whatever he wants. Instead of that, after Vietnam, Congress passed what's called the War Powers Act, which limited the president's power to start another Vietnam-style conflict by saying the president had to get permission from Congress before sending troops anywhere overseas. And so we still see the War Powers Act is still a part of going to war in America.